wanted to address with a series of webinars from the Embrace Awards. This is an award from Central Asia, a great HR award. And during our webinars, we discussed different very important topics. And today, I could say what we have topics, which I could say number one for all the international HR conference during the past at least 5 years, or maybe more, I think 10 or 5 years. In every international HR conference worldwide, I saw the discussions about these very important topics. This is the topics about diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. And today we have two great experts in this topic. Fatiah Touray from United Arab Emirates, Executive Director for Inclusion and Equity at New-Youk University from Abu Dhabi. Hi, Fatiah. Nice to see you there. Thank you for joining us. And Iroda Azimova from Uzbekistan, Internal Communications and Employee Engagement, expert from company Beeline Uzbekistan. Hi, Iroda. Thank you for joining us. Now we can start our discussion. And firstly, I will ask Fatiah to share the modern approach, how a company manage with very important topics, equity, inclusion, diversity. As you know, this is a very dynamic sphere now. There are a lot of companies who decided to implement these policies. And it's very important for us to understand the modern approach, maybe some best practice from different countries. So Fatiah, now I give you time for your speech, and after that we could answer some questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And it's really exciting to be here to talk to you in this space. If you don't mind, I wanted to share some slides just to help along in terms of some of the conversations that you brought in terms of best practice. And I think today what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about is this work more on a global framework, which is why I'm really excited that my colleague will be following me to talk about it more specifically in the context of Uzbekistan. So I think that would be a good framing to start. So let me just share my screen. Am I able to? Let's see. Let's see. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, excellent. So we'll start. So one of the things, and I'll make sure to keep time, so that you know, my colleague can go afterwards. One of the things that we talk a lot about is that right now global migration patterns are very, very evident, not just here in the United Arab Emirates, but also in other parts of the world. So if you basically take up all of the people who are living and working in countries outside of the place in which they were born, it would make up the 5th largest country in the world. And so the thing I always ask and talk to companies about in terms of global migration and thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion is thinking about the places in which your employees may be coming from, right? And the ways in which they're reflected in those spaces. The other thing that I also like to talk to individuals a lot about is around disabilities, right? 1 in 7 people in the world have a disability. So that's over 1 billion people worldwide who have, whether it's a physical disability, which is the ways in which a lot of us have been taught to think about people with disabilities, but also around mental disabilities as well. And people are more hyper aware of their neurodiversity and the status that they bring into the workforce. So talking to companies about the ways in which they're being inclusive to, this large population that exists in every company, that exists in every country, and making sure that we're not forgetting about those individuals at work. This is one of my favorite charts that I like to show, in terms of the different generations that we have in the workforce, right? And the ways in which, and again, this framing is in a U.S. context, and I do understand that, but there are certain characteristics that we can see with each moving generation, right? That is in the workforce. And the workforce is a unique place in that you will have people from, as people who you may consider elders in the workplace, to people who are young in their careers. And what are some of the ways in which you're tapping into those generational differences to make sure the workplace is inclusive? Okay. The other thing, that is really important for companies to note as we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I started off with global labor shifts, we're also talking about the ways in which work has changed, right? The ways in which young people and people are thinking about work and how they want to work and what they decide they want to work on, right? And so we saw this during the COVID movement, and it may be particularly concentrated in certain areas in the world, but people wanted more agency in work, right? They wanted more flexibility within work. So what ways is your company thinking about the lessons we learned during COVID-19 and being more flexible with working from home and other accommodations, right? We talked about the cognitive diversity as well, and making sure that, we are adhering to that. And overall, just having greater flexibility within the workplace. And so the next section that I did want to talk about, in a global context, there's some key concepts and some frameworks. When we talk about these terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, they can mean everything and they can mean nothing, as well. One of the things that I always like to talk to people about is that this is a field. This work is very important. And as you highlighted, every conference you go to, this is one of the main topics that comes up. And there are a lot of scholars, and researchers who are writing about this, whether it's in the business world, whether it's in the law, and in the legal framework, whether it's talking about AI. People are talking about these concepts within all of the different various fields. Um, I'm gonna skip through that slide and I'm gonna get to this, um, because I think it's really critical as we talk about diversity in a global context to think about the different ways in which these frameworks show up in different parts of the world. And so in the United States, which is where I was actually born and raised, when people have conversations about diversity, they're focused on race and racism, right? You probably hear this a lot, right? In terms of tensions between white Americans and Black Americans. And I think a lot of that has to do with the history of the transatlantic slave trade and the unresolved racial tensions that exist in the United States. Similarly, when you go to Brazil, there's a lot of conversation again around police brutality, right? And the ways in which individuals in Brazil, particularly high rates of the killing of Afro Brazilians within that particular context. Um, my counterparts in India, when they talk about diversity, they talk about diversity in terms of caste, the caste system, the legacy of the caste system, and the impact that it still has within various spheres, whether it's in the work sphere, whether it's in other spaces. And so, as we know, some of the public universities in India, there are individuals who have a legacy of coming from that lower caste, the Dalit caste, because that legacy is so strong. And so diversity in an Indian context in the United States. I mean, not in the United States, but just above the United States in Canada, they use a human rights framework that language of diversity in Canada. In South Africa, very interesting. People who hold roles like mine are called chief transformation officers. Transformation comes from the South African Constitution. That is the language of diversity in that context. In parts of the Caribbean, conversations are centered around colorism, right? That means the lighter your skin, the more access you have, the more proximity that you have to whiteness, the better opportunities you have. Really, as they think about diversity, Japan and its uniqueness, right? And for preserving what it means to be Japanese, they're also thinking about the fact that they have a large aging population, right? People in Japan live longer than many other people in many other parts of the world. And so, what they're trying to figure out in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion in that context is how do they counteract that growing age population, right? So their diversity conversations is talking a lot about ageism, right? That is happening in that context. Um, we'll keep going. In the United Arab Emirates, which is where I live and work, the language of diversity is tolerance, right? They use a tolerance framework that comes directly from their constitution, right? And I can go on and on and on about all of these different parts of the world, right? And just even thinking about your particular context and around the ways in which ethnic minorities, right, how that language can be charged, right, within Uzbekistan. It's been really fascinating for me to think about. And so when we talk about diversity in a global context, right, I think the challenges that people are coming from all over the world and people are speaking in different ways around the same context. But at its core, which is what I'll get to, and I'm seeing how I'm doing on time. As we talk about these terms, I think at its core, and like I said, these terms are out there and what we mean by that, and I'll get back to it. I think at its core, what we're trying to do, whether it's in the United Arab Emirates, whether it's in other parts of the world, is thinking about belonging, right? And belonging is a concept that comes from social psychology, and it really talks about human beings at a core level and their fundamental need to belong, right? Whether it's belonging to your family, whether it's belonging to your community, whether it's belonging to your place of work, right? And so after our physical needs and our safety needs are met as human beings, we all need love and belonging. And so as we talk about this concept in the workplace, right, we talk about the ways in which companies, right, in different parts of the world are fully engaging with the full potential of all individuals, right, within the workplace, right? This is what leads to innovation, right? There are studies done in happiness around workplace satisfaction, right? In the way that people are actually satisfied within the workplace, how that can lead to larger production needs, right? And one of the things that we really like to think about is that you can't have belonging without having diversity, right? So whatever country you're in or company you're in, right? Diversity, and just to go back here, diversity of representation of people, right? Women, people from different religious backgrounds, right? People from different ethnic groups, right? Not just having the same of everyone, that we like to use, right? We talk about equity, right? That is fairness in distribution in terms of resources, right? That takes into account the current situations that mitigate differences within the workplace. So, for example, if historically women have not been allowed to engage in certain parts of the workplace, you're going to see lower numbers of women within a particular context. So, it's really important as you're thinking about equity, right? What are the needs we as a company need to address in order to make sure that we have more women coming through the door? And equity is really difficult for people because they feel like it's not fair. You just need to work as hard. But equity is tied to why we don't see certain ethnic minorities in the workplace or certain women in the workplace. And so, in this illustration that you see here, we are at the dinner party. We can give everybody the same chair, but then the child will not have access to reach the table. And so we give the child a high chair so that she too can participate in inclusion. When we talk about it, is the degree to which diversity is embedded and integrated. And so, how am I doing on time? Can you give me because I can't see because of the shout out to me how much time I have left.
Everything is okay. So if you have any more slides about practice, it could be great if you share some ideas, maybe some examples of any companies from United.
Yes, I want to get to the practice. I want to get to the practice slides, but I'm asking you how much time do I have left?
I think at least 10 minutes we can use for sharing the best
Okay,
practice.
okay. I'll keep going because I'm going to get to the practice. I can't see because I'm toggling between screens. And so I wanted to give this all as a grounding and as a framework of all of the different additional terms. But in the UAE, like I said, whatever context you're in, one of the best ways to do this work is to look at the laws, the ways in which you do this work. So for us in the United Arab Emirates, it's our tolerance framework, Article 25, that really provides a legislative framework to fight against discrimination against individuals based on religion, caste, race, and I think I'm not going to go through all of these terms because I'm going to get to some of the best practices. But as we talk about these things, and especially as we talk about equity, some of the things that we talk about, in our institution that most people might say, you know, why is this important, right? And I think for us, we talk about things like colonialism, we talk about things like international racism, and the different ways in which it shows up around the world. We talk about Orientalism because that is really important being in the Middle East, and the ways in which the Middle East has been depicted in the West, right? And how those stereotypes have a lasting legacy. And I won't go through everything. We talk about different centrisms, right? And how the ways in which things are done in the United States or things are done in Europe have been centered in the things that we do. And people here, in particular in the United Arab Emirates, are saying, well, what about the ways in which we do things, right? How do we center people from different backgrounds and different identities around this? I talked about colorism, so I'm not going to go into that. We also have conversations around power and privilege. We have conversations on covering and in conformity, intersectionality again. So some sample strategies, right? And I think this is where, I want to focus the last part of the conversation. conversation before I turn it over to my colleague, right? Some strategies for an inclusive workplace, right? I think is really, really important as we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we look to our company's values to see where it is that we embed those languages around honesty, around integrity, around trust, around respect, and really use that as a framework and as a way in which employees can point to that, right? So that everyone feels included. I've worked with a number of companies who have a mission and a vision, but they hadn't necessarily defined what are the values, what is important to our company, in terms of the ways in which our employees engage with one another, in terms of the ways in which what are our beliefs and the ways in which we think that people can behave in order to be more productive. So I think that's important. I think it's important to define exactly what you mean by diversity in your company. As I talked about it earlier on, these terms can mean everything and they can mean nothing to different individuals. So diversity has different meanings in different contexts. So when you talk about diversity, right? Are you talking about thinking styles? Are you talking about language? Are you talking about ethnicity, religion, experiences, race, culture, gender, right? So thinking about what that means for your company is going to be critical, so that everyone has an understanding of what that means in that particular context, right? I think one of the things that we talk about in our context, which may be different from your context, is about pay and pay equity. Pay equity is huge in that men tend to earn more than women for doing the same jobs. We find that women and people from underrepresented groups, right? I know you have a majority, and then you have people who are considered to be part of different minority groups, right? And I think one of the things that's important as a company, is really looking at the ways in which you think about the company, what move that makes towards equity, right? So one of the things that I think a lot of companies, particularly a lot of HR people who work in human resources, are saying that we should do. But there are a lot of companies around the world who have this model of pay transparency, right? So that you can directly internally and see, what is the best. And that really moves the conversation forward as well. Conducting an equity impact assessment, right? So thinking about what are the equity needs within your particular company can be done in a number of ways, right? So in the US, it may be impact on racial, ethnic equity and inclusion in the workplace. In the UAE, we may say a tolerance, and it can be really simple to ask people, what are the challenges in the workplace, right? What are some proposals that you have? Putting that survey out to individuals in the company, right? To say, what are some suggestions that you have to make this workplace more equitable and inclusive, right? And inclusive, right? And it doesn't have to be something that is so deep, or like these climate surveys that they have that you have to go with external companies to do. But this is something that HR officers can do on a yearly basis, right? To just kind of get the temperature of what's happening within the company, in that particular context, right? Be a sponsor for colleagues, whether that's women or underrepresented groups. one of the things that we do know about the ways in which individuals are able to move through the corporate ladder or to get promotions is that they have sponsors, right? Individuals that can speak to their work competency, people who are there in rooms that you're not in that can talk about that. And we do know that there is a disproportionate impact of women and people who come from underrepresented groups that don't have sponsors, right? That don't have people advocating for them in those rooms. And so if you're someone who is a leader, who's in a different position, be a sponsor for colleagues that you wouldn't normally be a sponsor for, right? Get out of your comfort zone and getting to know individuals more in that space. One of the things that we talk also a lot about that is important for companies to know is to learn about microaggressions and what to do about them. Microaggressions is a term that we use in social psychology. You may call it something else in your context, but it's like the slight, subtle insults that you get on a day to day basis that seem simple and have negative, harmful impacts on women, on underrepresented minorities within the workplace, right? And so, oftentimes they're cast in like may say things about you as being a woman in the workplace, like, wow, you're doing a really good job for being a woman, or wow, you're doing a really good job for being someone who comes from this ethnic group that is not really in the majority, right? In the workplace, but having a database to think about what you want to do with people who have complaints as at work, right? In terms of hostile acts that are happening, what are you going to do about it in terms of a company? Are you just going to tell them, oh, they just need to deal with it? That's just it. Just deal with it. Or the other thing that we talk about, and I promise I'm almost done. Is to hire for individuals who have competency in talking about inclusion and talking about diversity and talking about belonging, equity, and accessibility, as I talked about people with disabilities in the beginning. Not necessarily that they have to be an expert in it, but that people who understand the importance of why it's important to be inclusive of people from all different backgrounds in a community, right? What happens in HR if you ask a question around, well, how do you feel about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, or what strategy do you have that fulfills the competency in that area? I think it will start to get the message out to individuals who are hired in your company or who are going to be working in your company, that this is something that's important, right? They asked about it at the interview. It stated in their compensation package that this is a company that is going to be looking for new talent. This is a company that is going to be looking for new talent. Giving your employees and colleagues proper and public credit for their work. Depending on the cultural context, some people have people under them just doing all of the work. And then there's almost like no credit or no acknowledgement for the work that they're doing. But a little bit goes a long way, right? Giving the colleagues that you work with or the employees that work with you credit, but public credit, really goes a long way into the other things that we talk about in terms of
Some disruption, unexpected disruption.
So I think that's a really yes.
Fatiah, yes, and we
I
lost
think
your
that's a really
presentation.
good place. Are we still there?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can show you, but we lost your presentation. from a screen.
Oh, from the stream. Okay, let me.
Can you share it again?
I only, yeah, I can share it. I only have, okay, a few more slides left. And then I promise we'll get to some really good conversations. I think affinity groups for employees are a way in which you can do that. Here we have affinity groups for certain groups of employees, and affinity groups are groups in which employees connect to learn, to share, and to in order to provide professional development. And these are for groups that may be underrepresented in the workplace. So sometimes you have affinity groups for women, you have affinity groups for mothers. Um, in my company, we have affinity groups for individuals who are consider themselves to be South Asian. And so the name of that group is called Sacred. So it's South Asians for Community Representation and Engagement, because that is a group that is a large population that works here, but in terms of mobility into higher positions, we're not seeing that. And so there are different affinity groups that show up for different employee groups in a number of ways. And so that's something that you may consider. Changing the recruitment strategy to hire more underrepresented groups, right? That is something that HR professionals can do. Um, Setting benchmarks for vendor and supplier diversity. I think a lot of the times when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we think about people, but we're not talking about the business aspect of this. And the ways in which companies can do this is to set benchmarks for how many women-owned companies they're going to work with, how many underrepresented minority vendors, right? And the funding, the money that we as companies, our vendors that we use, right? Making sure there's diversity within that. That is another way in which you can bring your procurement side and your business operation side of your companies into the diversity conversation. This is not something that's just for people who work in human rights, but the ways in which the entire company is working towards that. Publish demographic data online, and you can update this regularly towards goals. Why I didn't realize I had so many things. Using regular employee engagement surveys to highlight issues. Putting IDBE competency as a regular part of the performance review process, whatever those that as part of the performance review process, measuring this for competency. And what I want to leave you with, as leaders in organizations, right? And this is the last slide. The 6 characteristics of inclusive leadership. Really important for leaders of companies, for businesses, to really think about what are the 6 different traits of being an inclusive leader, and the ways in which we want to make sure that those values kind of trickle down throughout the company. And I'll stop there now from the presentation, and yield the floor.
Fatiah, thank you for your presentation. It's a very important part, a second part about some steps which you want to make for implementation, inclusion and diversity strategy at your company. I have one question. I want to ask you about conception of neurodiversity. I know it's a very popular last, I think, 1 or 2 years. When people talk not only about gender, age diversity, race diversity, religion diversity, but also about neurodiversity. This is a new conception for Central Asia. Could you share a little bit information about this conception? what neurodiversity is and how companies now can work with it.
I'm so sorry, you cut off a
Internet is not so good as it should be. Connection. I asked you about neurodiversity.
Your question was about neurodiversity.
Yeah, yeah. Right. What is it and how to work with it? Yeah. What is it and how to work with it?
Okay, so neurodiversity, and I just turned off my camera because of the connection to see if you can hear me for a clearer connection. So when we talk about neurodiversity, right, I think a lot of times, even as young people, when we thought about people with disabilities, we only thought about people with physical disabilities, people in a wheelchair, people on crutches, people with a cane. But when we talk about neurodiversity, right, and we talk about the different types of mental, and I don't want to call it illnesses because it's a stigma, but the different types of cognitive, brain functioning ways in which individuals that individuals carry and they have with them within the workplace, right? And the accommodations that they may need, right, in order to perform, whether that's more time, whether that's working in certain workspaces, they may be vision impaired, they may be hearing impaired, they may have other ailments, but I think people are more, there's less stigma around having certain neurodiverse conditions in terms of being in the workplace. Like individuals have dyslexia now, are fully functioning and working, right? That wasn't necessarily the case years ago, where if you had any type of neurodiverse status, whether it's attention deficit disorder or other types of functions that you would maybe deem that you couldn't be perform in the workplace. And now that has changed, right? We make accommodations for that. More and more people are being diagnosed and are aware of that and are disclosing that to employers so that they can give them the services that they need, right? And certain countries have laws to make sure that you have to accommodate those individuals in the workplace. And so I think that that's what I was talking about in terms of neurodiversity, having more neurodiverse individuals in the workplace. They were always there, but now they disclose. And what do we do as companies to make sure that we're accommodating them to make sure that they're performing at the highest levels?
Fatiah, thank you. If any of the participants have some questions, please could you write them in our chat. But now, thank you, Fatiah, and now we want to share some ideas about how a company could work with diversity in Central Asia. The example of Beeline Uzbekistan. So the case from Iroda Azimova, the internal communications and employee engagement expert. Iroda.
Thank you very much. This is my honor to be here with, along with my colleagues Fatiah and Tatiana. Thank you, Fatiah, for such a great presentation. Let me just share my screen and give me 1 minute, please. Can you see it?
Yes, but now it's not on full screen.
Yeah. So now?
Now it's great.
Yeah, okay. So I wanted to tell you about the diversity, equity, and inclusion practices we have in Beeline Uzbekistan. As an international company, we have many policies, we have many projects to create a comfort environment for our people. Regarding the previous presentation, so I have to make a little bit connection. So here in Uzbekistan, we have we have focused on gender and age diversity criteria because in our country many years ago, women were not allowed to work as much as they want. They wanted paying. They didn't have equal payment for their job. They weren't like being encouraged to work in the field that they wanted to. For example, if it comes to information technologies, digital, or some like deep STEM areas, they weren't allowed to work in it because it was known as male professions. And now we work on changing this thoughts and creating the environment for everyone. And also we work on age diversity. We want to create opportunities no matter the generation you belong to. For example, earlier it was only focused on millennials in our countries because they have more attitude to work in discipline, for example, and now we have to change and be more flexible for our new generation Z, and we create opportunities for our youngsters too. For example, we have internship program called B Generation, and in total we had around 300 participants. This year it is 15th season. And each year we have half of these interns being employed in our company, and they use all of our opportunities to work, to build their career path, and being engaged to great scale projects. We also have belonging practices because we create communities in interest. For example, we have football players, we have people that loves running. Each year they participate in some marathons. Also, we have a women's club to encourage our women to create their better path of career and to be the best they can be. So we have each month meetings where we gather women and invite speakers on different topics. For example, we last month we had career coach, and she helped our females to build their career path and work on it. And I would love to tell you more about our diversity practice that we had last year. It's called Touray. It's 1-year program for females in IT. We made it with our IT hub. It called IT Park Uzbekistan. The project was launched 2 years ago, but only Uzbekistan. And its mission was to create a platform for females to express their ideas, to launch them, to have some networking with each other, to be taught by great mentors and experts in the field, and to attract girls in this field so they can create something and be encouraged and be supported. This project received an award in capacity building also in Geneva 2 years ago. And previous year in 2022, IT Park came to us to discuss the sponsorship program, like supporting program, to make this project wider. So if 2 years ago it was only in Uzbekistan, we collaborated to make it in Central Asia in 5 countries: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. And we had great results during this year. We had several steps for girls depending on their previous background and experience. For example, if they were just only beginners, they didn't have ideas and they wanted ready to start and launch something, we had hackathon, so they could gather with some other participants and create ideas to move on. And then we had incubation program, where the ideas were created during the hackathon, were under the control of our mentors, raised into the startup program and to MVP prototypes. And we had also acceleration program for females who have their startups, who have their ideas, but they couldn't make it wider. They met some mistakes and they wanted to change it. So we had acceleration programs. And for those who didn't decide whether they want to work in the IT field or not, we created workshops and webinars so that they could know more about this field, about the specifics, about the the skills that they wanted that they should have to work in IT. And overall, we had more than 30 workshops and webinars, 2 waves of hackathons, 2 waves of incubation, and 2 waves of acceleration. So what we as Beeline Uzbekistan did for these participants, we created the prize fund, prizes for winners. We involved best speakers for webinars and workshops, not only from Uzbekistan, but also across our group of companies. We had our experts as jury members that could give them feedbacks and help them to make their ideas better. And we organized tomorrow's Expo Startup Exhibition 2 months ago. It was a great event for those who succeeded during this program, who had their ideas and went through the whole program. So they came as hackathon participants, then go to incubation and acceleration, and they showed the results they achieved during this program. It was 17 startups that were created by females only. Here you can see some of our workshops, webinars. So we held them via Zoom. So about the figures, we engaged more than 1,500 participants from 5 Central Asian countries. They created 68 prototypes and 115 startup ideas. Here, a little bit more about the representatives from other countries. So we had from Kazakhstan 361 participants, from Kyrgyzstan 150, from Tajikistan 67, 31 from Turkmenistan, and 393 from Uzbekistan. About the hackathons, we had more than 1,000 participants that were engaged into 138 teams. We invited 10 mentors that worked with them during 2 days to make their ideas, to work on their ideas. And overall, they created 68 prototypes, and percentage of developers in these teams were 44%. 90% of them were females, and some of them invited their friends, like men, and it was great to see how no matter the gender, people support each other and create. They were they had idea that united them, and it was great to see that nothing else mattered for them. Also, we had incubation and acceleration program. Participants were more than 260. Now we had 6 educational sessions, including financial literacy, business literacy, how to create a strategy. So we helped our females to deep dive into the business, not only like I want to create something that like idea in IT that only about the technique, but also it was about the business strategy. So how do I start? What resources do I need to make them real? How to manage with teams, how to manage the resources, and so on. So we help them in every field that they needed to make this startup succeed and launch. Number of startups that were created first was 115 and ready to launch 42. And about the webinars and workshops that were open for everyone, we had more than 300 participants, 25 speakers, 30 trackers that were about like you came to the first workshop or webinar, and you start writing your progress. For example, first time I find out what something about the business. Second time I found out something about the financial literacy, and it was great to see that more than 70% of participants said they overviewed their thoughts, their ideas, and now have something to work on to make their ideas better, more productive and effective. Also, we had 50 plus educational sessions about everything. It was more about soft skills, how to present, how to prepare to pitch day, to demo day, how to attract money from investors and so on. And it was also very productive. And the latest event we had 2 months ago, it was a startup exhibition, Tumaris Expo. Best startups were invited to show their progress and to attract investors in their startup. 17 startups. Number of guests were more than 400, and 300 of them were business angels, like vendors. They were investors that were interested in projects to invest. And we had 10 startup battle teams. It was open registration for every startup that didn't perhaps participated in a 1 year program, but wanted to show their best and also attract investors. We had 10 startup battle teams. So influence that we had on our employer brand was like coverage more than 1 million views. Positive tone of reference were more than 75, and we are leaders now on our market. Growth of the CSR tone was plus 37% point, and 10 publications about our female participants. So we help them also to communicate with their audience, to make PR articles and grow and become acknowledged. And this is the thing that we're mostly proud of, that average age of females, of participants, was only 20. So we had girls that just finished their school, and girls that a little bit over 20. Average was 20 years. And we also had some awards that acknowledge the success of this program. We have award from IT Park for being engaged and supporting this program. And we also had an award on Central Asian Summit. We had bronze. So this means a lot for us, and we don't stop. We are planning to make it even wider and create a big scale of the Central Asian community, something like women in tech or tech women in USA. We want to create the same here to support our women and let women encourage women. So this is the practice we had this year and we worked on. If you have any questions about it, I will answer with pleasure.
Iroda, thank you for your very interesting case. I have one question for you. What is next step for you in the development of diversity and inclusion policy?
So the next step we're working on this year is about creating the forum for girls along with IT Park. So these girls that participated last year can this year become mentors, become speakers and experts that can share their background and can encourage other girls and attract more girls in this field. And we now have some negotiations about that. So maybe this autumn you will hear again about this project.
Thank you, Iroda. Thank you for sharing your presentation, your case, and your practice. I hope we can use it different countries, especially countries who is working in the telecom IT industry, because it's really wonderful case for not only for Uzbekistan but for the Central Asia. I think we are in the end of our webinar. I want to say thanks for Fatiah and Iroda for these very important topics. I hope this is the start of an open conversation about the topic in the Central Asia. I think from year to year we will discuss it more and more, because now I see what more and more cases from different companies who start to work with this topic now in the Central Asia, but in the future we expect more very interesting ideas. And I think it's very important to share ideas worldwide, because a lot of different experience, a lot of very interesting practice we could meet there. Thank you for joining us, and all the participants who join us from a webinar, to all the participants who watch us on Facebook, and hope to see you again of our webinars of the Ambrose Awards. And also we are waiting for you on the Ambrose Awards and Summit in October, and we expect for some of your cases, if you have some cases in diversity inclusion, that could be great if you share them with us. And that could be great if you enter our summit, where I think one of the topics which we could discuss could be also about diversity and inclusion. Thank you, Fatiah. Thank you, Iroda. Thank you to all the participants. Have a good day.
Have a good day. Bye.